Did you listen to
I listened to the podcast. So
the Blue Bottle podcast?
right. So following up on last week's when we went through the Starbucks story.
Yeah, I feel like we've been on a kind of like a case study series the last couple of weeks with Starbucks, and then there's a little case study to be talked about with the Blue Bottle podcast, as a podcast that talks about kind of the history and what happened with the transaction with Nestle buying Blue Bottle
From the same acquired podcast.
Yeah,
and it's
totally.
older, obviously, because
Yeah.
I think it was 2017 was when the podcast
Yeah,
came out, maybe.
it came out right after the transaction happened.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that transaction was
Bonkers.
it was hilarious. Yeah, I felt like a lot of people reacted to it in a lot of different ways.
But it's really interesting again because, I mean, some of the similarities to the Starbucks case study are that the owners of the business are making decisions along the way, and that those decisions have longer term ramifications that everyone should be aware of.
Well, so there are a couple things that were really interesting to me about the Blue Bottle acquisition and Blue Bottle in general as a company. And okay, I just want to say this. James is awesome.
Yeah.
And like I totally respect him. So if I'm not in here saying someone did something right or someone did something wrong or whatever. It's like he's always been a friend and he's always treated me really well and he's always been friendly to the community that we're a part of. Like even back in the day when I was working at Ritual in San Francisco, I remember the one year, it was the year I won regionals. They hosted it in Berkeley and he had a bunch of people over to his apartment and made everybody food and had a little kind of after hours, barista get together. He's just always been a super cool guy. So just wanted to get that out there in front because my first memories of Blue Bottle are from the Linden Street kiosk, which was just a really fun, interesting place to be.
Which they do a little side note in there that was like his friends when he wanted to get into like having a physical location. Right, that was like they say that was his friend's garage.
Yeah, which is wild.
Dope.
It's
so
wild.
Awesome.
I remember some of the fun things they used to do there because they were on. Okay, that place is really simple. And I think one of the things that James has always been really good at is the theater of things, even in a really basic environment.
Like
so
the back of someone's garage.
Yeah. So one of the things that I remember from my first ever trip, which I took with my friend Tony Serrano, he was looking for a coffee roaster for one of his projects. And we went on this road trip and we went to Ritual that had just opened. We went to the Blue Bottle. There's a place in San Francisco called Organica, which is maybe one of the first multi-roasters in the Bay Area, by Eaton Suno, who later worked at Groundworks.
What was the one started with a letter? What was the one that started with E? That like I'm not gonna have enough of the name of it.
Echo, maybe.
Yeah, Echo.
Echo
That's what I was
in
thinking
Santa
of.
Rosa,
Yeah.
like Andrew Barnett.
Yeah. Those
Yeah.
are all early spots.
Yeah, we didn't go there on that trip, but I'd been to that roastery before because he was roasting before he had a proper cafe.
Yeah.
Now he owns Linea, obviously. But I remember we went to Blue Bottle, and I remember almost everything about it. Jamie was serving us, who later opened a Brasso in New York. He was one of the mainstays over there. And the menu was just really, really artistic. I remember the flavor descriptors for the coffee and for the different espressos. And they had these little pictures, like, one of them was described as like, oh, it's viscous like motor oil from a 1940s Peugeot. It was like poetry.
Again, the
right?
theater, yeah.
Yeah, it was like this magical poetry. And there was even this little like hand-drawn picture of this scooter, this little thing. And I'm just like, oh, and all of the coffee descriptors were like that.
Yeah.
And I really liked that because it was super artsy. It just felt like someone cared.
Yeah.
And this was before flavor descriptors of coffee were super, super popular in that way.
Yeah. So what year?
This is probably 2005.
Yeah.
To our, in the super nerd community, you would have people talking like that, but they were more talking oh, it's chocolatey or it's citrusy. We were just kind of getting to that place. And James is essentially writing a poem for each one of his coffee blends or coffee, like espresso offerings, which I thought was cool. And then they were heavy into the pour overs then too. So where a lot of people were still, and again, I'm a big batch brew fan, but when there's something new and exciting going on, it's hard to ignore it. So they were doing pour overs at the kiosk. And I thought it was funny the way they did it was they had this, I can't remember what grinder, some sort of ditting, but they just fill the grinder up, bulk grinder. It's like a KFA or something. Fill the grinder up with coffee. And then they wouldn't weigh anything out. They just put the paper in the pour over cone and they just turn the grinder on and turn it off and just kind of eyeball how much coffee was in there.
Like 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, it's like just old school style, like which you could probably get pretty accurate.
If you're gonna be like the reasonable amount per second or something. If you're kind of like counting in your head.
Yeah, if you were in a rhythm, you'd be like 1, 2, off, 1, 2, off.
Yeah,
and then with the making the pour overs, there's nobody's using scales at this point.
Nah.
It just wasn't happening. So even in this really basic back of the garage setup, he's got this really flowery language. He's got this element of theater, and it was just like a really cool spot. And that is a theme that I think carries through to a lot of his later cafes, especially Mint Plaza. So going back to the podcast, one of the things I didn't realize at the time being a part of that scene was I didn't realize how early on they had taken on money to grow.
Yeah. By that time, they had already raised the first $5 million. I think it was 2004.
That's wild. Yeah, which you couldn't get. So $5 million in 2004.
Yeah,
like there was no sense of it at all. Like it didn't feel like a big money operation at all. Because it was still just out of the back of this garage. And maybe he was setting up. I can't remember when the stores opened. Like, when did Mint Plaza open? That's a good one.
That was the first, after the kiosk, that was the first store, right?
I can't remember if that was it or if they had one in the Ferry building.
I want to say on the podcast, they talk about Mint Plaza as being the first one.
That's probably right. I remember because I was working at Ritual when it opened.
Because they talk a lot about the tie-in between Twitter and Blue Bottle.
Okay, 2008.
Right? They talk a lot about like tie-in between those two companies, and I think Twitter had offices in the Mint building.
Okay.
And they kind of go back and forth between this like relationship that the kind of like those two companies had.
Yeah. Yeah, so I didn't realize how early on they had taken on.
I believe that's what the first amount in the first year.
So maybe that was because the podcast was interesting. There were some specifics, but then there's these big
gaps
areas. Yeah, so I'm just wondering if that was to fund.
Yeah, which if you didn't take any debt, right? I mean, that would help you fund like probably next couple cafes, have some operating capital, the roast like a roastery,
right?
That would fund all of that.
Yeah, it really put a lot of those experiences into perspective because jumping from 2005 to 2008 with Mint Plaza opening, Mint is a crazy store like for the time for 2008, and the theme of theater continues, and I'm pretty sure we were there on opening day because everybody in the industry was.
Yeah.
And so I mean, just try to picture this in 2008. So this is the first time I've seen several things. This is the first time I've seen avocado toast, which I feel like Blue Bottle invented the idea of the coffee breakfast. Like you got this thick cut toast, avocado, like beautifully poached egg, and that just wasn't common. You didn't see that kind of stuff there. Once you walk in on the far back wall, you've got this, 6-group infrared burner siphon setup from Japan, which is unlike anything you'd ever seen at the time. Yeah. Again, you see it now. It's still not super common now, but you would never seen it then. And we were playing with siphons, but with little butane burners, in the basement. So to see this like infrared burner, multiple group siphon thing is crazy. The front of the shop's got a standard espresso machine, where you can get your espresso, still the pour over theme. And then continuing with the feeder, like from the siphon, is like there's a single group lever machine. He's got certain espressos that you can only get on this lever machine. It's like that's how they pull them. So the whole thing is just a spectacle. And it was just really crazy to see. I don't think I really appreciated it at the time. Yeah. I don't think I knew how,
like, the grandness of the theater.
Because he was going a different way than everybody else was going. Like, everybody else was stripping down. So blocks away, I'm working at Ritual, and we've got a basic espresso machine. We're big batch French pressing, and that's it. It's like we have.
You guys no pour overs.
No pour overs at the time. The pour overs were definitely not. They weren't not cool, but they weren't cool. They were just not a factor. Like, it just wasn't hitting yet until maybe the Clover started going on. We went to Clover for single serve option before they ever went to pour over. Yeah. And they went to pour over after in the kind of like Ben Kaminsky era. And then with, flat, like no food except for pastries. You could get a mocha, but chocolate was like the only kind of sauce we have because the trend then was like, dude, we don't do syrups. We don't do this. We don't do that. It's like, how much can we take away from the cafe experience because everything else is like detracting from the coffee. So we were very, coffee centric, and we didn't really think about, aside from latte art, like what's the sense of theater going on? We're kind of riding on this.
Right, yeah, I mean, your theater, I feel like, was all around the espresso machine.
Espresso machine.
Right.
Yeah, super communal.
Which you guys took to like a super high level.
Super high level.
You take to a super high level.
It's just it's a really different approach that I totally get now, because he's capturing, I think, more people with that approach than
it's like bigger. It's like,
well, you can
a bigger theater. It's bigger theater,
right? You can appreciate it. It's in the same way that someone could go into the Starbucks Reserve Roastery and say like, this is crazy. Like, they don't know anything about coffee, but they're like, I saw the freaking beans moving through the ceiling. And they're like going to James's place. They're like, I see the guy with a lever machine, and they're like, the siphon's bubbling and all this stuff is crazy. And I paid $15 for a cup of coffee, and I don't even know why, but I feel good about it. Whereas like we were catering to like the super, super coffee nerd, like a more niche market.
It's harder to see the theater behind the espresso machine than it is to the stuff that's like in your face.
And it's just like, if you brought your mom, if you took your mom, who has never had specialty coffee, to like Ritual at the time and to Blue Bottle Mint Plaza at the time, she would probably be like, oh yeah, that Blue Bottle place is really cool. It's super interesting. There's lots to see. Whereas like Ritual is more like, the coffee was good, but I can't even really appreciate it because I'm not that deep in it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I'm like ranting on their, I'm ranting on Blue Bottle, which feels funny. It's so funny to talk about other coffee shops as a coffee shop
and it's
owner.
like I said, like where you have your relationship with James. It's like I don't really know anyone at Blue Bottle, and so it's like I come with more of like an outside perspective, I guess.
Yeah.
From listening to the podcast.
Yeah, and then so 2008 2005 they'd raised the first round of money, and then there were multiple rounds leading up to Nestle.
Yeah, so there were 5 rounds, I think, because they raised a total of $125 million, which is just an insane amount of money for something that seems so small. Right?
It feels like especially at the time, it just felt like a boutique company.
There's like, so the first raise was $5 million, and this is what they talk about in the podcast. The second raise, so they get to, they get to $125 million. I try to get these numbers right. It's like 5, and then it was 10, and then it was 25, 25, 50. So we could like back into, okay, so maybe it was 5 and then 20 and then 25, 25, 50. And I think that gets to 125 million.
And some of them, did it say like JP Morgan?
Well, so the biggest one they talk about in the shift is like the initial first few rounds are through more traditional like venture cap funding.
Right.
But then in the last round, they talk about fidelity investors, which
Okay, that's what it was.
yeah, and they're a huge fund, and they really only invest in companies that like generally go public, or have some kind of bigger transaction. And this is just what I took away. Just again, as the through line of the episode is like when you start taking money from, I mean, at first, if you start taking money from venture capital, it's like everyone just understand that venture capital funds generally have like a 10-year life cycle, right? It's like
I feel like
we've talked about. I don't know if we talked about this before, right? But if I'm running a venture capital fund, cool, it's Charles Jack Fund 1, right? And they just have different numbers, right? Charles Jack Fund 2, Charles Jack Growth Fund 3. And it's like, cool, this fund, I started it in 2005. It's like I raised money from my investors in the venture cap, and cool, we vested in company X. It's like you generally, that life of that fund is 10 years, and then my investors expect their money back. Right. I mean, there's other things. There's other less common things that can happen. They can get they can get the shares of the company, or you can try to extend the fund longer than 10 years. But the basic setup that the vast majority of VCs run is like a 10-year fund.
So when they're funding, or when they're, ponying up that money, they're not taking on ownership shares. It's more like, I'm investing in you at a specified return rate over a specified time. So are they getting payouts every month usually, or how does the pot work? It's generally
like a convertible debt that like converts into equity at a certain time, but it's treated like equity on the balance sheet. So it's essentially like raising equity without. They're not getting paid out generally, unless there's some kind of small coupon like interest payment. But often there's not.
And that fund has taken on an ownership share then.
Yeah,
definitely. Right. Okay.
100%.
And then,
so first round.
But when you're saying like, so let's say they take on that ownership share, and the reason you're saying, well, this is why most VC investments, like, hang on, I'm slow with finances, so let me wrap my head around this. So they're taking on an ownership share, and then after that 10 years is up, how are they recouping that money? Are they selling those shares to someone else, or hopefully going public? It's in their best interest to go public.
Yeah, so it's often that they're finding someone to buy the company that they invested in.
Right.
Like the Nestle outcome is like, if you're watching a company like Blue Bottle raise money like that over a course of 10 years, you're like, yeah, dude, I mean, 100%. Like that's the normal outcome. It's like that's what should be expected. Like if you work at Blue Bottle, if you are familiar with Blue Bottle, it's like, and you're at a company where they're raising venture capital fund, it's like you should be expecting that the goal is that someone else, 95% of the time, someone else is either someone else is going to buy your company, or you're going to try to go public.
Because those are the two ways that the VC fund can recoup the investment that they made.
In a small number of cases, and they talk about it in the podcast, it's like the VCs could all sell to a private equity, which sometimes can have like a longer hold period. But even if you sell it to a private equity fund, that private equity fund is still going to want to grow it and either sell it to somebody else or go public, because that is how your investors get their money.
Right, because this is a money-making situation for those people.
This isn't charity.
It's not a random angel investor to where it's like, oh, I have a uncle who's a billionaire and he just
all of
gave me a couple million to start this thing.
Yeah, all of these VC funds, all these private equity funds are judged by the investments they make and the return that they can get to their investors.
Right. So, yeah, one of the things that I thought was really interesting, and they didn't really describe how it works, maybe you understand this, is that they said that James and some of it was either partners or key employees, have their own board and their own ownership shares, make their own decisions that's separate from the bigger one, which I didn't really understand how that worked.
Yeah, so a lot of smaller companies, right, start out as LLCs, or LLCs taxed as an S corp. A lot of like flow through tax treatments. But essentially, when you raise money from somebody like a venture cap fund, you're going to turn into a corporation. That's going to be the structure that the venture cap company requires you to be. And one of the things about when you are a corporation is you can create separate share classes that have separate rights.
Got it.
And especially as you go through so many funding rounds, all these different investors often have like different rights and different share classes.
So maybe
which kind of put them in order of like who gets what when things go good or who gets what if things go bad.
Would a big, like a really basic share class be the difference between, like a voting and a non-voting shareholder?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like we're a corporation, right? It's
right.
like we could have, right, where me, you, and Jared have like share class A, and like our friends and family that have given us a little bit of money over the years, like they could have like share class B. So exactly, that's kind of how it looks like they have it structured, where there's different share classes.
I would love to know the details of how that works. Like that's really intriguing to me, like how they have it set up.
Yeah.
Because it seems it's like for the amount of money that they've got, and it's nowhere near that Starbucks size, but it seems like they've done a better job maintaining that allure of independent company.
Yeah, the like brand, culture.
Right. Again, it's hard to put on the timeline too, because Starbucks, you're kind of starting in the late 70s essentially.
Yeah, right.
Early 80s.
Much older than people think.
And it wasn't until, well, let's see. It wasn't until the probably
89.
Yeah, and then early 2000s was when things were just, I'm like, oh yeah, this is just a commodity company.
Yeah,
it didn't feel special
like
at
30
all.
years though, really, from the start of the company.
So if we took Blue Bottle 2005, they're about 10 years off from that 30-year mark.
Yeah.
Then it's like, we'll see where they are.
But it's like
now.
But to me, it just goes back to, again, it's like, as you start to raise that money and as that money grows in size, that money is given to you for growth, right? So one, you're signing up for growth, but also likely there's a board that's created, and likely those investors make up a majority of the board. And so again, this is where it's interesting. You don't necessarily know how it goes with with all the share classes and things. But when you've raised money from that many different VCs, because each round was made up of multiple VCs, and again, once you've raised money from somebody like Fidelity, it's like your path. All those people are going to actively be working to find someone to buy you.
Right. And then that's what happened with Nestle. Is Nestle like bought out all of those smaller like independent, VC, what do you call them? Funds.
Yeah.
And then they took on all that debt, and now they're
not even debt. They just paid out the original VC investors. They own whatever stake those investors have.
60-something%. I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, something like a majority stake, right? And then now it's just Blue Bottle has whatever resources Nestle will allocate to them to use. And it's like I think they said that hopefully it's like James still has some piece, and other maybe executives at Blue Bottle still have some piece, which is really, I'd say, for something like that, the best outcome that you could have, because a lot of those transactions go the way of like take VC money, grow, sell, and often the person who's buying it wants to buy all of it, like wants to have total control, which again, maybe it seems best case because maybe in the way the transaction happened, Blue Bottle can still maintain some of its Blue Bottle-ness, right? And still maintain some of that brand allure. that wouldn't have happened if Nestle just bought 100% of it and is like whoever's in control at Nestle is like up to the whims
Right.
of what they want to do.
Yeah, that's where I'm so curious to see how that's structured, because you can see the difference between most Blue Bottle cafes now compared to something like a Mint Plaza. To where now the stores they have a similar aesthetic, and then they're overall really clean, they're light, they're bright, they're kind of feel overall energizing to be in, but they're very stripped down.
Yeah.
They're very basic, and you've got, your standard espresso machine, your standard menu, some grab and go food items, nothing crazy. So it's like I go to the Los Gatos one quite a bit, because it's a good little stop through if you're going over the hill. It can like goof around, like go to Manresa, go to Blue Bottle, do a little loop, like get some ice cream, whatever. And it's a nice clean store, but it doesn't have that je ne sais quoi that Mint Plaza has, and you see more of them like that in LA. So that's one part of the equation. And then they're doing things like the tasting experience, that James and a small team is hosting himself, and you've got this.
Is it Blue Bottle affiliated? Like, was there any Blue Bottle branding there, or was
it's
that
a Blue Bottle experience?
Okay, all right. I didn't know if it was just a James experience.
No, okay. So he's not at all of them personally.
Yeah,
but he's at some of them, and he's working with the team. From what I got from talking to him, there is a small section of the staff and that works on those, and they're building the experience together. There's like a couple people who are ultimately creating it, like him, and I think Benjamin Brewer. I know Selena's on that team.
Yeah, that was in LA.
Yeah, and it's a Blue Bottle thing. Okay. Like you go through the Blue Bottle website, you pay via Blue Bottle. Right. And that's why I'm like really curious as to how it's set up, because you would think that in a growing company that got bought by a gigantic company
for a huge amount of money, $750 million valuation,
that things like that are kind of lowest possible priority. But that whole experience is very James Freeman. It feels very Blue Bottle, mid to like late OG. 2000s. Yeah. I mean, it's like, it's incredible. Like, it's really cool to go to. Like, the thought process is there. Like, when I go to that, I feel the same way that I feel when I read that fancy menu or saw that siphon bar for the first time, to where it's like, he's spinning his own records, and he's got these, vintage gigantic speakers powered by this little tiny tube amp that's just like the whole thing. It's just like the serveware, like, it's fucking dialed in. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's a dream. So I'm just kind of in awe of the whole situation, where I'm like, I want to know how this is structured, because it literally seems like you've got the best of both worlds.
Yeah, totally. Right. That was kind of how I came away from the episode, being like, they seem like they threaded like the thinnest of needles in the best possible way, that somebody coming as such like an artistic founder of this like carefully crafted company could, like, the outcome just like you said, is like that they've threaded this needle into the best of both worlds.
And the way he's been able to maintain, there's still this allure on the things that he does personally that are nested within Blue Bottle that I want to be a part of. So, for example, this was the other day. Actually, it was a few weeks ago. My time is warped.
You've got a small child.
It actually might have been months ago.
You have a small child. That's understandable.
I'm looking at what he's posting on Instagram, and he's doing a Italian-themed pop-up with this dude who owns a company called Una, I think, Pizza, who randomly used to come in, visit in Santa Cruz, and come into Verve back in the day. Yeah. And he was working partially out of San Francisco and I think partially out of New York. And I was just like, oh, dude, awesome. Like, and James is activated in Southern California. So I'm like assuming it's in LA. So I'm just like, get right on the Southwest website.
You're like, I'm ready to go.
Well, because I showed Jenny, I was like, dude, look at this. You know, like classical Italian, like traditional Italian Neapolitan style pizza and classic Italian espresso. I'm all over it. This is like a dream, like served by two legends. Like, so Jenny's like, yeah, you should go. And I'm just like ready to buy a flight. And then I'm
guessing this is going to be in New York.
It's in New York.
Yeah.
I was just like, motherfucker. Dude, it's like LA is so convenient because you can fly out for a day. You know, you can spend 6 to 8 hours and still have a great time. But it's like, he's doing things like that I just want to be a part of. And I think it's incredible to be able to create that within a potential clusterfuck of hate of people being like, you're a complete sellout. Like your company's owned by Nestle. We don't like things that they do.
I mean,
so,
we know people that have left the company after that happened. Right? I mean, there was turnover.
Yeah, there's which makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, obviously there's going to be some percentage of people that feel a certain kind of way, but I'm looking at it from the complete other end, which is just like, damn, like how, what, you know, like he gets to have, you know, they're flush with cash. They get to grow. There's not that burden. And then he still gets to play in his own little sandbox.
To create the theater. To have the resources to create the theater.
Which I feel like is one of the key things that is continually adding value to the brand.
Yeah. Which is like, I mean, introspectively, it's like just real talk is like that's something we've always struggled to do, is to balance you know, the realities of business with the theater, you know, that we want to put on, right?
Which is why that's one of the only reasons, not one of the only reasons, that's one of the reasons that makes that investment funding a little bit kind of interesting to me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like when I toy with that idea, I toy it from the perspective of, if we weren't so hamstrung by only being able to do like SBA loans that are of a certain size, that have really, you know, people don't know that they have really strict requirements for what you can use those funds for. There's not a lot of flexibility in that money. You know, you're putting together these sheets for the bank that say in any given build out, we're using this percentage of the money for this and this percentage of the money for that part of the build out. And you can't just shuffle it around. Like you can move it around in small percentages, but you kind of got to know your shit and like know exactly what's going to happen.
Exactly.
And it's fine. Super grateful. But like, it's always that like, okay, we have to do this because this is what the business is. And we're like creating an experience. I feel both ways about it.
Yeah.
Because
it's interesting
because on one end, I love, well, maybe the easiest way to visualize it. So for each of our birthdays, we always go to these fancy dinners, and they're kind of, you know, 3 times a year. You get to have this crazy experience where every detail is attended to, you know, not unlike the Blue Bottle tasting experience. It's like completely curated and essentially perfect in every way. And those are really, really cool to see. And it would be really cool to put something on like that. On the other end, I firmly believe that the bulk of our lives are mostly shaped by our day-to-day interactions. Like your day-to-day interactions with, you know, who's the people you see every day? Who's your barista you see every day? What are these things that are easy to dismiss as small and overlook? You know, it's like, what's going on in my house when I wake up in the morning? The way I interact with my wife and my daughter are going to shape my day much more than like any of those fancy dinners we go out to. Yeah. Like I want to go to the fancy dinners too. You know what I mean? And it'd be cool to put something like that on. So I'm not saying I'm like, oh, ho hum for us, we have these cafes. It's like I know that people appreciate what we do, and I know we're doing something super special. Like I never doubt that. But I'm also just like, damn, it'd be super sick to like be able to like cord off this funding and just create something like that, you know, like,
and those are like the really difficult decisions, because oftentimes that funding comes with some kind of strings,
right?
And you know, and some kind of answering to other people in some way, and so it's like that's where the difference between being totally independent, totally independently owned, and you know, trying to be creative with how you, I don't know, receive and fund capital and resources versus other ways, especially that we see here in, just south of Silicon Valley, where people raise money, push really hard, have these boards of directors that they have to answer to, but then have a lot of resources to do the things they want to do. It's right. It's like they're two very different like parts of the spectrum. I feel like, right?
I could see if we were a little bit bigger, there might be this kind of happy medium where there's not a huge influx of extra money, but we're able to have enough income to where we can just be a little less hands-on in certain areas. And then instead of needing big money, we have big time. And time is its own superpower too, right? It's like, think of what you could do if you didn't have all the meetings and day-to-day responsibilities, and you had, 20 hours of that week just set up towards, special experiential projects. Like that seems to be another way to do it too,
Yeah, and it just that requires. It's really interesting because that requires when you start from zero, right? Like t equals 0. It's like, and you're kind of learning along the way how much scale you need to, say, pay market rate at all your leadership positions, right? Which is a journey that we're still in at, like, what, t equals 8,
right?
is we essentially run the company as a nonprofit, and that when we make money, that money goes toward paying people more, and it's kind of like in our journey to provide like sustainable livelihoods for our leaders in like a coffee industry, which is notoriously like hard to have a career in. Right.
Well,
it's like,
it's
like we're trying to build a company where everyone in leadership can have a career in coffee. Would you say that's fair?
I would say that's fair. If you were, it's the more I think about things like career, and the more I think about things like living wage, the more, not confusing, the more interesting it is to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because I don't even know what that means. You know what I mean? It's like, I think market rate is a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Because there's just so many different factors for what people expect and need out of their livelihood.
Sure.
Right.
And so maybe it's better to talk about it in terms of like creating a leadership team where all the positions are market rate.
Right. Because one of the things that I think people get twisted a lot is, certain jobs just pay more or less money, and I don't think if you're just how, going back to the investment stuff, one of your themes that you've brought up over and over again with the Starbucks and the Blue Bottle is like, there are intentional decisions that people are making that have long-term effects, right? It's like, despite what someone like Howard Schultz says, like, it's all about what he does, and he's setting up a situation where Starbucks is destined to grow gigantic and be public, and like, that's just a thing. Like, we get to set up our careers in the same way. Like, and if we make a choice to go down this rabbit hole of coffee, it's got to be really passion driven, because at the end of the day, there's so many other careers that you could go into that would allow you to earn more money. It's like, not all jobs are created equal, and I don't think it means one's better or worse than another. But if you want to be rich, this is not a good career path for you.
Right, because it's so labor intensive, which just means, and it's so like lower margin, lower efficient relative to, say, some kind of software company or even services companies like accountants and those types of businesses. There's part of the magic of the cafe. It is all the people there, but that also creates a cost and like a lower margin. I mean, we're essentially like a manufacturing business, which is a relatively low margin business, and I have a retail business, which is relatively low margin business. So that's where you need the scale. You need to reach a certain scale to where the money that's being contributed by each of the different departments of your business is enough so that everyone that is like the heads of each of your departments is being paid market rate.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's kind of the journey that we're on, right?
Exactly. And then it's like, then even if you are at the top of your game, your best friend who's a lawyer is just going to make more money than you.
Yeah,
like, you know, because part of the reward of doing that kind of work is doing that kind of work.
Right.
You know, and I'm not saying that's an excuse to pay people less. It's just, there's just different markets. It's like, you know, we're sitting in Beeline, like our friend's motorsport speed shop, and we'll talk about his margins, and his margins just blow ours out of the water. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Oh, really? I don't know anything about the margins of like a high-end auto.
Well, a lot of the tickets are like, you know, they're big money, big
high
money
ticket.
Right. High average ticket, like high average ticket, and relatively low labor to reach it. You know what
Whereas
I mean?
we're like a low, like in the scheme of the economy, the U.S. economy, we're like doing these very small transactions over and over and over again
that are
with
very
high
labor
touch.
intensive.
Yeah, right. High touch in terms of taking the transactions, high touch in terms of making the drinks.
And anything that's service facing requires more people to manage it than something that's not. So it's like, if I'm going to bring my Porsche in and say, I need
you
motor.
You got a Porsche?
No, I do not have a Porsche. Definitely do not have a Porsche. If I bring my Civic in,
there you go,
and you know, say I need the motor rebuilt, I want to do the brakes, you know, I might drop 20 grand on a service.
Yeah.
And then one person can do all that work, and it's kind of behind closed doors, essentially. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Ryan's next door building engines.
Like your brand isn't dependent on the service, like the service or hospitality aspect of it is almost dependent on the quality of the work done.
Well, just think of how much more labor it takes to engage with 300 to 350 people a day.
Yeah.
Like even when they're not in the transaction. So it's like someone comes in, they pay for coffee or food or whatever, and then we give them that. But then the whole time they're interacting with their space, we have a group of people that's activated to make that experience good, whether they're finished and just surfing on Wi-Fi or hanging with their friends. So
like,
people are bussing tables. People are
checking if you want water checks.
Right.
They're asking how the food was.
Right. Whereas over here, it's like you can drop the car off. You'll have a down low with someone who takes in the car, and they still want to give awesome service, but that awesome service looks really different. It might be a weekly check-in on a bigger, longer running project that takes, 20 to 30 minutes, and then the rest of that time someone is completely engrossed in doing the thing and not being a guest facing person. So it's just a totally different game on every level.
And there is that all across the economy, right? There's all these different types of businesses, and so it just brings it back to, I don't know where we started this conversation. But right, it brings it back into like thinking about the decisions you make and what the longer term consequences, good or bad, of those decisions are, because there will be, and it's like I feel like I feel like we've tried to not make any decisions that would have long-term, like trying to make decisions that have long-term positive consequences and trying to limit the decisions that could have the risk of like long-term negative consequences, right?
I would say that that's about right. Jeez, what's going on out there? Is someone dropping off a car?
It's a Porsche.
It's all Porsches here. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that's why, we don't, we own our own company. We're kind of slow and steady wins the race. We definitely have hiccups, but we're driving the whole time.
Yeah.
And
there is, and everybody gets, everybody who starts a company, it's hard work no matter what business you're in, but you get to choose what that journey looks like. And I feel like me, you, and Jared are aligned on like, we want to try to enjoy the journey that we're on. Like it's not about grinding to a goal at the end, right? That, we'll be happy once we, I feel like talk to some people, they'll be like, I'll be happy once I reach this goal. And then people get to the goal and they're like, oh wait, now what do I do?
Yeah, that's the attitude that I have on my best days. And then on my worst days are the ones where the other pressures take over. Like you're talking about the paying people a solid market rate and being, a preferred employer in our class. And I I do feel a lot of stress with that because
yeah, I do as well.
Because we have some really amazing people, and I'm simultaneously believing both things, which is like everyone's essentially replaceable, but man, how much would it suck to lose some of these people just because we're not growing the business in a way that allows them to make the living that they deserve. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or that like we should be able to pay them. That would be, that'd be a hard one. And then it's even more stressful compounded with, this is just real talk, to where it's when
you like everyone that you work with, then you
Well, no, I mean, I think one of the things I've gotten better about is the coming and going of people overall, to where it's like I'm a true believer that like everybody needs to find their own happiness, and this is going to be the right place for some people, and those are the people that I generally enjoy doing a lot of work with. And it's like, it's cool because they're the people that are doing what you're saying, where it's like, it's hard work, it's not easy, it's not a cakewalk, but like the day-to-day is fun. This gives me energy and brings me joy. But when I'm thinking of, some of those people higher up, someone like a Mark Dulce is now sitting on that team with us. It's like, if those people want to leave, they should do what they want to do, but I don't want to replace those people. That feels very stressful to replace someone like a Mark.
Yeah.
Because he's just such a, I feel like he's so culturally aligned, and he's got just a certain amount of deep-seated tribal knowledge. It's really hard to replace, like at any market rate. And then,
well, I think for any company that's done, I feel like we've done a good job supporting people in creating, supporting people who want to be here for the long term, for the long term. And it's like, that's led to a lot of our leaders have been here for
that's true.
5, 6, 7 years. And so anyone who's in any position who's been here for that long, it's like, there's always life situations that happen that could take people on to doing something different. But it's, I don't want any of those people to leave, because like you said, it's like, and this is again something, just tie back into like the Starbucks episode, was like, he talked about never developing people enough to where they have people that have been there for so long with like the same cultural alignment that he wanted to have, to where those people could be running the business.
Right.
And it's like, I feel like that's where we have done a really good job of creating a business and a culture where some people do want to stay that long, to where we have a really deep bench of people who have been here a long time and have that tribal knowledge and are like amazing examples of the culture that we want to have in the business.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really cool.
Which again, to your point, is like, as the business owner, is like scary, if those people want to go do something else, because it's just a bummer no matter what business you're in, to have people that have been here so long, when they do move on, because then you kind of have to like nurture someone new into those kind of roles, and it's just, it takes time for them to like develop that like cultural impact that other people have.
Right, at that level, because it's not like we're big enough to where there's this whole network of, it's not like we're like, cool, we're going to hire a new partner program team leader and we'll just run him through the training program. Like there is like, we are the training program, right? You know what I mean? It would be a lot of touch bases with us personally.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Anyway, I'm super grateful for those long-standing relationships and like the way that people are showing up to do their work. Just, I mean, it makes me so happy. And I'm probably not as good as about being as like grateful as I could be, like on any given day that, you know, things run the way that they run and people are able to step up in the way that they're able to step up. And there's just these little things. It's like, I don't know if you saw the base camp thing that Herman posted today.
Oh, yeah. I did.
Where it was like the biggest.
Yeah, the
Swift
busiest
had its biggest day ever. And it's just like,
over the weekend.
Dude, that's incredible. Like, I don't know. And like, that just feels right. And then we had things like Damian Chavez from Honduras was in town, you know, a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, all the work that Dulce and Herman did.
Oh my gosh. It's like, it's incredible. Like the fact that you could bring a producer that you've been working with for years and years and years here and have them feel completely taken care of. And, you know, they ran the staff meeting. He's doing a presentation staff. It's just all these little things that are just really cool. And I'm just like grateful of the energy and like the effort that people put into it. It's really fucking cool to see.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Anyway.
All right. Have we run the full circle? I think we've run the
course.
That?
So I gotta go touch base with Mark about doing some latte art classes on Wednesday. So, yep.
All right.
Thanks for listening, y'all.
Everybody.
We'll see you next time.
Take care.
Hey everyone, that's the podcast for the week. Thanks so much for listening. If you heard something that inspired you, let us know, or tell a friend. These are the types of connections that are the most important to us and that we seek to create every day. If there's something you heard and you want to know more about, send us an email to podcast@catandcloud.com or head to our website, catandcloud.com/podcast, and let us know. While you're on our site, check out everything we have to offer. Dive deep into one of our single origin coffees or pick up a little treat for yourself. We have something for everyone, so check it out. Also, find us in the usual places, YouTube, Instagram. We're always there sharing amazing things. All right, that's it. Thanks everyone for being awesome. We'll be back next week.